So we have two family trees. This was a fascinating fact to me. You have a genealogical family tree, which is your ancestors' family members. You do your research, you fill it out, and that's your family tree, right? But you also have a genetic family tree. Not every ancestor in your genealogical family tree is going to be in your genetic tree, okay? You actually will not share DNA from every ancestor, okay? That is pretty important. So why is it important? For me, it's important when I do my searches because you have to follow the DNA. And, you know, if there's no DNA on certain lines, then even though the paperwork tells you one thing, that may not be the actual line that you're looking for. So how do we know who these matches are to us, okay? Well, they figured out that depending on relationships, companies like 23andMe, Ancestry DNA, and Family Tree DNA, if you are a first cousin to someone, you will 100% share DNA. So if you have a first cousin who DNA tests and the results come back and they do not match you, something's not right. Somebody's daddy wasn't their daddy because they are not your first cousin, okay? And pretty much second cousins, you'll share DNA. Third cousins, you will share DNA with about 90% of your third cousins, okay? So there is going to be possibly a 10% somewhere around there that you actually won't share with, okay? And as it goes down, it's less remote, you know, or more remote that you will not share DNA with that cousin. So, you know, people get upset sometimes. They test a third cousin once removed and they don't share DNA. You need a closer match to be able to prove that. So, and I'll explain a little bit more about how that's inherited. So how is DNA measured? DNA is measured in centimorgans, okay? A centimorgan is actually a ruler of the DNA segments, okay? And it was Dr. Morgan is the one who discovered what a centimorgan is, and that's why it's called that. So we actually have numbers that we look at in genetics, and it's abbreviated small c, big M, and that tells us, by looking at those numbers, that gives you an idea of what the relationship is that you're looking at. And this here is a brilliant chart. Again, Blaine Bettinger is actually a genetic genealogist who has combined thousands of DNA information from people like myself who submit information on known relationships. So if I know I share 500 centimorgans with a first cousin once removed, I know who he is, I know what our relationship is, I can submit that information, and that gives a range of centimorgan numbers that helps us to determine what the relationships are, okay? So, for instance, a parent-child is going to share somewhere on average of about 32 to 3,500 centimorgans, okay? My son and I share about 3,400, I believe, okay? And then the relationships go down from there. And as it goes down, there are more options to what the relationships can be, and it becomes much more difficult to determine the exact relationship, okay? So you have to do work to figure out, look at ages, look at, you know, documented information to try to figure out who that person is. About 1,700 can be a grandparent, a grandchild, an aunt and uncle, or a half-sibling, okay? So if you match somebody within the range of about, say, 1,300 to about 1,800, you know, you can't assume that that's your half-sibling if you don't know who they are. You have to figure out their age, where they were born, you know, what's the story. You know, it may be a grandparent, it may be a grandchild. So as you get into it, you have to dig for information. And one thing people don't understand is when you get this test, it'll give you an estimate of the relationship. So it may group somebody under first cousins. Well, Ancestry or Family Tree DNA or 23andMe have no way of knowing what that relationship is. They're just giving you suggestions. So it's up to you to be able to figure that information out. This information can actually be found online at DNApainter.com. And they have a lot of good tools that genetic genealogists use for that. This is also basically the same thing. It's a chart that gives the averages of the centimorgans as relationships go down. Oftentimes, the category that I use the most, it seems like when I'm doing searches, people normally have second cousin matches. A second cousin is someone that you share a great-grandparent with, or a set of great-grandparents, okay? So that can be somewhere in this range of 75 to 360, an average of 224. So if I get a 280 centimorgan match, I'm normally going to go with the flow that is a second cousin to start off with until my documentation shows something different. So it's just another chart, and this chart is by DNA Detectives. DNA Detectives is actually a Facebook group that is where I learned how to do adoptee searches. Okay, so DNA matching, what exactly is that? A lot of people get their results on a DNA test if they've done it for ethnicity purposes. They look at it, they see I'm 80% French, I'm 13% Scottish Irish, and they never look at their test again. They don't even realize there's a section in there that shows DNA matching, and that's going to show people that you are biologically related to. So what exactly can you do with those matches? DNA gives you the power to trace all of your ancestral lines. So you have 8 great-grandparents, okay? In a perfect DNA world, none of your great-grandparents are related to each other, okay? So you should be able to look at your DNA matches and figure out which ones match on which line, okay? Now, being from Louisiana, or if you're from an area that is what we call an endogamous area, which is a custom of marrying into a religion or an area, you're going to find out when you do your family tree that when you get back possibly a few generations that, oh, well, I've already seen this name before, and I've seen this name before. And especially in South Louisiana with Acadians, our ancestors all settled in, the St. Martinville area when they came to Louisiana years ago. And so we DNA connect on many different lines. An example, my father-in-law and I actually matched 13 different ways between 5th and 7th cousins. And that's very common in South Louisiana. It's common in the hills of North Carolina. It's common in island populations. It's common in Jewish populations. So ideally, when I did this, my mother had passed away, but she had a brother who was living, and so I asked my uncle to DNA test because I wanted to be able to separate my maternal and paternal sides. During this process, I found a half-brother. My dad had another child, and my half-brother DNA matches my mama's brother. So past second cousins, there's really when you're in this kind of a population, it's very difficult to specifically say what the connection is. So, but, oftentimes it is easy to do, and it definitely helps when I'm doing biological family searches if you can do it that way. So why are you DNA testing? If you've DNA tested, did you DNA test to further your tree research? Were you looking for biological family? I'm really amazed at the amount of people now, 5 years down the road, that DNA tests to find biological family. And it's an amazing tool, absolute amazing tool to be able to do that. Again, determine your paternal line. Including my family, I've had, a lot of people who say, I don't know who my father was, or I did a DNA test and I found out that I'm not a Fontenot. Can you help me figure out who my father was? And these tests are very helpful for that information. And that's also helpful for health purposes. A lot of people, I've had so many adoptees tell me, I don't know what to put on the form when I go to the doctor's office, And that kind of blew my mind when I thought about it, because that comes second nature to me. But for a lot of people, that's not the case, and that is very important also. Ethnicity purposes, curiosity, that's exactly why I did it. I was watching that TV commercial and I'm like, I want to do this. And then I saw the DNA match side of it, and that changed my story. But it definitely is the reason most people DNA test. So again, to determine the name of an unknown ancestor, in Louisiana, especially central Louisiana, we had a number of people who came on the orphan train. And I've been fascinated with those stories. I have a daughter-in-law whose great-grandfather came on the orphan train. And so to be able to tell those people who their great-grandfather is an amazing, fact that you can actually do that. I just recently spoke to someone who, her father-in-law, she found out that the man that they thought her father-in-law was actually not his name. Her father-in-law's, the name of the man who she thought was her father-in-law died in the war, in the World War II, and someone assumed his name. And so now they're doing DNA testing and they have no connection to this family. Fascinates me. There's a lot of wonderful things being done. There's a lot of innocent people that are in prison who are being released because DNA has proven that they are innocent. There's a lot of unidentified bodies. I worked a case in the Texas killing fields. Janet Doe was unknown for about 28 years, and her bones sat in a box on a shelf, and she was identified as Donna Gosselin Prudhomme after that amount of time. Those things are happening every day. There's so much that can be done with this, and there are things that you can do to help make these discoveries, and I'll share that information with you also. So again, who are the major players in this DNA game? Autosomal DNA testing has become a major industry in the United States and many other countries. The largest database is Ancestry. Ancestry, I believe, now has about 20 million testers. If I can remember right, when I started this in 2015, I think they had 2.5 million. That's how much it's grown. 23andMe pushes their health side of things, okay? And so Ancestry now has a health side, but I'm gonna tell you there's also, you can test at any of these countries and you can upload your results to a site called Prometheus, and it will give you health information. You can upload your raw DNA to that site and it would give you that information. Family Tree DNA. Family Tree DNA is based in Houston, Texas, and it's actually the company that I would say serious genealogists use to DNA test, because that's where you go for your Y-DNA testing, your mtDNA testing. It was founded by Mr. Bennett Greenspan, and his goal was to figure out his information on his mother's line that was Jewish. It was a very odd last name. And he found a family that lived in another country, but they didn't know that there was a connection until he went to Phoenix, Arizona University, and they figured out how to do a DNA test to see if there was a connection. So it's pretty fascinating that that's how this all began. MyHeritage is also a site that you can DNA test on. MyHeritage, Ancestry and 23andMe are the only two that do not allow outside uploads, which means if you're going to be on Ancestry or 23andMe, you have to test with Ancestry and 23andMe. You can take those results and upload them to Family Tree DNA, MyHeritage, and Living DNA. and your results will be on there too. And in the work that I do, I think, you know, the more ponds that you fish in, the more information you can get, because you never know where that DNA match that you're looking for can be. And then if you test on all these, you can upload to a site called GEDmatch. It's GEDMATCH. And GEDmatch actually has a chromosome browser, and it allows you to look at things more closely. And it also, you don't have to test with every company. I have tested with every company, but you can take your results from Ancestry and you can put them on GEDmatch, and anyone else who has put their results, you can see if you share with them. So it's a way to make it a little bit easier. One thing in my line of work, when I do law enforcement work, you know, a lot of people are concerned about the fact that my DNA is out there. I'm going to tell you, when you do one of these tests, the only information that anybody gets, including you, is a list of matches that you match. So when I work a case, whether it's an adoptee case or a law enforcement case, all I see are people you match, and it's my job to figure out how you match those people, okay? That's how law enforcement uses these cases, okay? If it's got to be a serious crime like a murder or a rape, okay, for them to use it, or an unidentified person, whether it be an unidentified person from war or a murder or whatever, and we get those matches, we figure out how they match each other, and you build a family tree from that. And that's how you find these people. So I want to dispel the thoughts that people have of being scared of putting their information out there. Now, if you want to be able to help solve these cases, you know, I mean, it brings to mind a terrible case of a baby left in a barrel in 1994. You know, baby cases really get to me. And doing this process, they were able to figure out who the child's mother was. Doesn't mean that the mother was the murderer. It just means that they were able to identify the child. And I think that's very important to, you know, put names to faces. So on GEDmatch, you can opt into law enforcement use, and all we get is a list of the people that you match. And also on Family Tree DNA, when you put your information there, you're automatically opted in. But Ancestry and 23andMe absolutely do not work with law enforcement at all. So that's just one point of information that there are some people feel there are privacy issues about it. But you know, I believe everybody should have that choice if they want to help with those cases or not. So so that's pretty much in a nutshell what autosomal DNA testing is and what it can do. And if you have any questions, I'm happy, I'm always available to answer questions. And you can reach me through the library. So thank you all very much.